Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching the Britney Spears documentary called Framing Britney Spears by the New York Times on FX. Let's get to it. I'm going to react to it. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's watch the documentary.
Inside the room at one point.
She was rushed to the hospital overnight.
Wheeled out brought here to Cedars-Sinai Hospital after distress.
Major depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder. No one could say what it is.
Is under psychiatric evaluation. That is involuntary, by the way.
In an emergency session Friday, a family court judge suspended Spears' right to even see her children.
Okay, so the documentary isn't going into it yet. Hopefully they will. But I remember all sorts of allegations about Britney Spears and her mental illness. I keep waiting for some proof. Of course, in the documentary, I don't know what the purpose of the documentary is per se, but they are talking about the headlines. Certainly everyone was speculating that she was going crazy or losing her sanity or losing her mind. And I know from experience that those kinds of conversations are kind of pointless. When people look at celebrities, they'll see odd behavior to them or behavior that seems out of place to the celebrity persona that we're used to, and will label it as mentally ill. So I don't see any evidence of any mental illness, at least presented on the documentary. But we do see one thing right here, which is a court actually determined that Britney Spears should be prevented from seeing her children, or at least as this documentary is reporting it. That usually means that you're in a court, and you have one side and the other. One side is saying she is a danger to her children, and the other side is saying she's not a danger to her children. And they will bring experts who maybe evaluate her. Hopefully they actually evaluated her. Usually that's the best testimony you can give, as a psychologist assessing someone and presenting their findings. And usually those assessments, they take a number of hours, sometimes observations of the person in question with the children. And from those data, you go onto the stand, and as an expert, you say, according to my expert opinion, there's this diagnosis, and I think that she is at risk of harming her children at this time. What she needs to do is she needs to do the following things. She needs to follow treatment recommendations. She needs to get evaluated for ongoing therapy, ongoing medical trials, these kinds of things. Maybe even drug and alcohol treatment, who knows. But when a court determines that a parent cannot have access to their children, not always, but it usually means that there was a good case to remove the rights of that parent. Courts, in my experience, not all the time, there are many different judges, many different styles, but in my experience, I've been to court in hearings like this a number of times. Judges are very careful about taking away a parent's rights to see their children. State governments in the United States tend to really have a high bar. You need to really cross a very high threshold to determine or to demonstrate that a parent can't see their children at all. Because there's different gradients too. There's you can't see your children at all. There's you can see children with supervision. There's you can see your children if the other parent is there or maybe other family members are. They said under no circumstances can she see her children. Now, what does that mean? Was the court prejudiced against Britney Spears because she's a celebrity? Could be. Were they prejudiced against her because she had quote-unquote slutty videos? Could be. Were they prejudiced against her because she's a woman? Could be. Did she have a terrible lawyer? Could be. Did she have terrible experts that weren't really helping her out and advocating for her? I don't know. But when I hear that a court said that she couldn't have access to her children, usually what that means is a lot of evidence, a lot of data that we might not ever find out because those records might not ever be revealed to us. Like I said, could be prejudice, could be biased against her. I don't know. But that's just something that I think.
Change in visitation that removed Ms. Spears stays in force.
Until when?
Indefinitely.
Earlier today, Britney Spears was taken to the hospital for the second time this month.
We are told that she's been placed on a 5150 hold. That is essentially a medical health hold.
So I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my words as if I do know a lot about the law. But I do know a lot about forensic psychology and assessing people in this way. I have sought involuntary hospitalization for clients of mine. And 5150 is the California code, I believe, for an involuntary hold, meaning that you, at least in my state, the way that it works is that someone is deemed at risk either of hurting themselves or hurting other people because of a mental disorder, and they are refusing to go to the hospital. Usually, as a therapist, I can convince people in these kind of rare, I don't usually treat clients like this, but I have people who might be suicidal or very symptomatic and seemingly erratic. And I will say, I think you should check yourself into a hospital because of the following reasons. And usually I can convince them to go, especially when I say, and if you don't, I'm going to have to call the authorities to actually come in and involuntarily detain you because of what I'm seeing. Ethically and legally, I have to do that. I have no choice. Frankly, I don't like that responsibility, but it is my responsibility. And I could be held liable or at fault or something if I don't do that right now. And usually at that point, people say, oh, okay, fine, I'll go by myself. But I have had to actually call the authorities at times. And again, if someone is having that involuntary hold, that usually means that there was a good indication that not only was the person suffering from high symptoms of a mental disorder, but they were also at risk of hurting themselves or other people. There are a lot of people with mental disorders in the community. As I said in a previous episode, a third of Americans, if I remember right, are suffering from a mental disorder at any given time. So a lot of people have mental disorders. Now, more what we call severe mental illness, things like psychosis, delusions, schizophrenia, mania, these kinds of symptoms, these kinds of conditions are more concerning. There's more erratic behavior. There's usually more concern from the community and people around those individuals. But there's a lot of people who are suffering from psychosis, and there isn't necessarily a reason to involuntarily put them in the hospital because they're not presenting a risk of harm to themselves or other people. They might be very depressed, they might be hypomanic, they might have voices in their head, and that isn't reason to hospitalize them necessarily if they're following treatment, if there's no indication of danger, which is the majority of people suffering from mental disorders. We need to uncouple the association. By the way, this is off the topic, but we need to uncouple the association between mental disorders and violence. There's actually not a very strong correlation between that. And the vast majority of crimes committed, violent crimes committed by people, are not people suffering from mental symptoms, or the mental disorder symptoms are not a factor in the violence. Anyway, I have whole episodes on that. You can listen to it. But the point is that when I hear about Britney Spears being involuntarily detained, that means that a number of individuals collectively signed off on this very severe governmental action. For the government to detain someone who hasn't committed a crime, by the way, they are suffering from a mental disorder. For the government to step in and say, we are going to detain you, we're going to put you in a facility against your will, the government has a high bar that they have to cross. And a lot of times when us clinicians are actually asking the courts to do this, they won't do it because they have such a high bar. Or the individual, the person suffering from the mental disorder, will go down many of the assessment steps, and eventually they'll, maybe in the few hours it even takes to assess them, they will have calmed down and they will be able to exhibit behavior and assure everyone that they're not going to hurt anyone. And so for someone to actually go all the way and be detained, that usually means that there was a good reason. Again, was there bias against Britney Spears in this moment because of the media, because of misunderstanding, because of people lying about her? Because that can certainly happen. Other people can say, she said this, and she's like, I never said that. So there's a lot of questions there, of course, and I don't think I'm ever going to know from any data that I search on the internet whether or not that call was made in a responsible way. But I just want to give some background on that because the documentary isn't going into it. I think the documentary at least is leaning towards this conclusion that she was unfairly, hospitalized or something, Because I'm guessing if the documentary was to at least provide a balanced point of view, they would give us data as to why she was hospitalized. Maybe they will. Let's watch.
Spears, can you tell us what's going on? How's Britney doing?
So around this time, Jamie, Britney's father, files for a temporary conservatorship over Britney.
We hope the best for your daughter, sir.
Conservatorships are a unique legal arrangement, usually designed for elderly people who are unable to take care of themselves or their money.
Right. So this is a pretty severe action. I don't usually see this kind of action. Now, I don't know. Again, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe it happens all the time. But it wouldn't be standard for a family member to step in and say, because my family member has been involuntarily detained because they have a mental disorder and they're at risk to other people, I'm going to seek conservatorship. That's not normal. Now, might there be good reasons for it, especially at this phase? There might have been a lot of concern from the parents, from the family, maybe even from Britney herself, that one, who knows what kinds of symptoms she's having. I'm going to assume that it was beyond a certain threshold. And also, she has a lot of power. She has a lot of money and a lot of celebrity. And when you have a mental disorder and you have certain kinds of symptoms and you have a lot of money, because that's one of the things that people actually run into sometimes, is that when they're having these kinds of symptoms and they're in public and they might be acting in a chaotic manner or maybe even having altercations with people, then usually something happens to them right away that detains them just because of their behavior. Like they have a minor bump in with the law, or they don't have enough money to pay for an Uber to get somewhere. Usually their life falls apart pretty quickly if no one is there to help them. And if you have someone like Britney Spears who has millions of dollars and all these people who want to mooch off of her, I could see a family member saying, this is too dangerous. There's too much at stake. She could literally get on a plane and go to another country where there's different laws and hurt herself over there. Who knows what could happen to her. So I could see a concern like that. I am not saying that the father had those altruistic concerns. He very much could have had a selfish concern. He might have even been thinking from the very beginning, yes, this is my chance to finally, cash in and get control of the millions of dollars. There's no data. I don't know. Maybe they'll reveal something.
I was involved as an attorney of record for the first few months of the conservatorship proceedings.
Awesome. We're going to hear from the lawyer herself. This is going to be good info. Let's listen.
Our client was Jamie Spears, Britney's father. Courts take conservatorship proceedings really seriously, and that's because I think every person's rights are sacred. Right.
That's usually the case, and that's what I was saying earlier. In order for someone to have their rights taken away like this, there's a very high bar, and that lawyer is confirming that for sure.
There are rules and procedures in place to make sure that there's accountability. They are substantially unable to manage their financial affairs, or they are susceptible to undue influence or fraud. It's more than just, I can't balance my checkbook. It's, I could be duped into giving away my money.
Right. Now, as I've been saying, there's a chance that if we were there watching the court hearing, that we would say, whoa, they're really taking a leap here, and everyone seems to be biased, including the judge, against Britney Spears, presumably because she's a celebrity or that she comes across a certain way in the public eye. Who knows? But like I said, it usually doesn't mean that. And for someone to grant someone conservatorship for a long period of time, that usually indicates that there was a good reason for that. I don't know, though. Let's continue watching.
Let's go, man. Is he going to get a restraining order against Sam? Will we get that then?
They file for a restraining order against Sam Lutfi. They allege in court documents that Lutfi had taken control of Britney's life, her house, and her finances, and even had been drugging her.
Sam, can you tell us something?
Lutfi denies the allegations.
Can you tell us anything?
But the court grants a restraining order.
All right. So again, I wasn't there. I'll just tell you my experience. I think that's the purpose of me doing these reaction videos, is to talk about my experience as I'm watching this. And Now we have a situation that is similar to a custody battle. The boyfriend and the dad are fighting over Britney, and both of them are trying to prove to the court that the other person is a bad helper of Britney. The dad had all these allegations to the boyfriend saying that he did all these horrible things. He was taking all her money, he was drugging her, and a restraining order was granted. There is actually a fairly low bar for a restraining order or a no contact order. These kinds of things judges will hand out pretty readily. My impression as a non-legal professional is that the courts are interested in reducing conflict. And if they can say, look, let's not have contact between these two parties, because if there's no contact, then there won't be an opportunity for problems. And that's why the bar is usually pretty low. You can have a restraining order taken out on you without any corroborating evidence. In my experience, I'm not a lawyer, like I said, but in my experience, there have been, let me tell you a story, actually. Early in my career, I was treating a family, and by the way, whenever I talk about a case, I either fictionalize it or I put a bunch of stuff together or I put stuff around it, because, when we present on cases, clinically, we have to protect clients' confidentiality. So just know that. Or I have actual permission from the client to talk about it, which doesn't usually happen, but sometimes does. Anyway, point is that I had a client many, many years ago, in the beginning of my career, 25 years ago-ish. There was a divorce, and I was seeing the mom and the kids. The mom brought the kids in to see me, and I was treating the mom and the kids. And I was trying to get the ex-husband involved as well, because he was heavily involved, obviously, in the children's lives. And we had a little bit of interaction, but not a lot. And he didn't seem to really want to talk to me. I don't know why. I can't really remember. Maybe he was insecure or felt vulnerable or felt like he was being ganged up on. But I usually really try to make people in that situation feel welcome. And because they are, I really want, as a family therapist, I really want everyone to be involved and to feel comfortable in therapy. Anyway, but one day I get a call from the mother telling me that she cannot bring the kids into therapy and she can't come to therapy anymore. And I said, why? Well, and she says, well, my ex-husband went to the judge and got an order saying that you, me, as a therapist, could not treat the kids anymore. And I said, what? Your ex-husband, I thought we had a good relationship, but it wasn't strong, but I thought we were building it. Anyway, the husband went to a judge and got a judge to say, in some sort of order, I don't know if it's a no contact order, some sort of order that said that I could no longer treat the children anymore. And in this document, which I eventually got my hands on, it said that I was 19 years old, which I wasn't. I was like 27. But he also said that I didn't have any credentials and I wasn't licensed, I wasn't certified, which wasn't true. And the judge just believed it. Or the judge just said, I don't know if that's true, but let's put this order in place and prevent Kirk from seeing these kids. And I remember just being astounded that a judge would believe lies and issue this order. Again, in my experience, it's because judges are like, okay, let's do this temporarily right now. Let's separate these parties and let's reevaluate this in the future. So in this situation, we have dad and we have boyfriend that are both trying to get control of Britney, which is, on one hand, you could argue they're both saying, I have Britney's interests at heart, and I'm the best person to take care of her. On the other hand, you could say they're both trying to get a hold of her power and her money. And who knows? It certainly looks bad, but we don't really know. There hasn't been anything in this documentary that has convinced me either way. Maybe they'll tell us. Let's watch.
Ambulance under police guard. The troubled pop star was released without fanfare
Shocking new developments in the sad story of Britney Spears. She's now out of the hospital. She went straight from there to the Beverly Hills Hotel, of all places. All that and more, Larry, at the top of the hour.
That's Anderson Cooper at 10. You want to say something?
I was going to say it'd be less sad if we just left her alone. I mean, why don't we just leave her alone and let her just go on with her life?
Yeah, really. That's what I think. Of course, that'll never happen in our paparazzi-centered world. But, yeah, just let her, especially now, right? Why descend on her now? I know it's big news. I mean, I suppose you could report on her, but why did all the cameras have to be shoved in her face when she just got out of the hospital? And I want to really emphasize this, that everyone understands that she was involuntarily hospitalized due to a mental disorder that had symptoms or that was a factor in her being unsafe to herself or others, meaning that the government thought that she was at risk of killing another person or harming another person or herself. We all understand that. And then you descend on her with all these cameras and questions. Like, come on, people, just knock it off. It's obvious you shouldn't do something like that.
Britney's family law attorneys and asked me if I would speak to Britney because, well, the whole world knew that her father was trying to establish a conservatorship over her.
Hey, she's trying to get out. Wait. Let her go through, please. Give her some room to go through. Give her some room to go through.
I met with Britney.
Hey, be careful. You're hurting her. Back off.
I mean, really, people? Now, as I've been saying in previous episodes, if you have a whole economy based on doing this to celebrities, meaning that this is how these people make their living, and we shouldn't fault people for trying to make an honest living. And this is, quote unquote, an honest living because there's nothing they're doing that's against the law, at least, most of the time. There's nothing against the law for having a mob of people do this to a human being. So they're trying to earn an honest living. What's the problem is that as a society, we don't have laws to protect people in this situation. We need to have laws about what you can do to a human being, especially when they're in a situation like this. And then if we have laws, then you can have boundaries around what those people trying to earn an honest living can and cannot do. Can't they get pictures from 10 feet away? Do they have to be literally touching her? It's really barbaric. And I'm pretty sure in 20, 50 years, people are going to look, I probably won't be around by then, but people are going to look back on this and say, what were they thinking back then? Why were they acting that way? What was wrong with society back then? On the other hand, I could see another scenario where it goes the complete opposite direction, and we all have paparazzi following every single one of us all the time because we've fully given in to the notions that propagate this kind of behavior.
First thing is, Britney was able to make the judgment, hey, I get what's going on. I get that I'm not going to be able to resist this conservatorship or avoid this conservatorship, right? So that's a pretty sound judgment. The second thing was, she said, I don't want my father to be the conservator. That was her one request. She wanted a professional, somebody independent.
All right, so we're hearing a lot of detail here from the lawyer that Britney talked to. He's saying that Britney knew that she wasn't going to be able to fight the conservatorship. So what does that tell us? I don't know, but what that could mean is that either from advice from experts or even just from her own assessment of herself, she knew that her mental disorder was presenting in such a way that someone probably should be a conservator, or that she wasn't going to be able to demonstrate easily or even possibly to a judge that she didn't need a conservatorship. So again, that is another tick in the column of Britney was probably suffering from something pretty severe and pretty entrenched, meaning that it wasn't something that you could easily get over very quickly, meaning that at least at this point, she didn't have a treatment regimen that was able to sustain symptom reduction. There are people who suffer from pretty severe bipolar or pretty severe schizophrenia, for instance, and with proper treatment and support and medication, they're able to be fairly symptom-free or maybe even low symptoms for years, maybe for the rest of their life. At this point, maybe there wasn't enough time. So she's saying, yeah, I'm going to lose this battle. I'm definitely going to have to give in to a conservator, but I don't want my dad. So that's interesting, right? That she's saying yes to conservatorship, fine, but not my dad. What does that tell us? Well, it's data, at least from this person, that the dad was up to no good. Who knows? But it's just a tick in that column anyway.
She also didn't want him controlling her finances. The day that I went to court for her, the judge said, I've got a medical report, and you haven't seen it, Mr. Streisand, and I'm not going to show it to you. And it shows that she's not capable of retaining counsel and directing counsel on her own.
Interesting. So they're saying that there was a report, probably from a psychologist, that had assessed her. And I'm actually trained to do this. Of all the things that I'm trained to do, I wasn't attracted to this kind of work for a variety of reasons that I won't go into. It seemed interesting to study, but not that interesting to actually do in real life. But the way that it works is that a psychologist that's trained to do this kind of work will actually assess an individual to determine whether or not they're capable of making a determination about their legal counsel or their legal situation. There's technical language for this that I'm forgetting because graduate school was a while ago, but essentially that's what it is. And you're assessing whether or not someone knows where they are, who they are, what's happening to them, what would be the consequences. And if a psychologist in talking, just let me give you an example. This is a fictional example. Someone is in the throes of a schizophrenic, psychotic break, a break from reality. And they believe that the FBI is after them and that aliens are speaking to them, that the FBI is watching them at all times, that aliens are now living inside of their family members' brains. Everyone is out to get them, and they can hear voices from the aliens that are telling them what to do. Maybe the voices are berating them. Maybe the voices are telling them to get out of town. Maybe the voices are telling them to sell all their stuff. Who knows? There's various different manifestations of this. This isn't what all psychosis looks like, but this is one profile. So imagine that someone was in that state, and then a psychologist sits down and asks a few questions and says, so you're about to go into court, and there's going to be a conservatorship hearing, and you have hired a lawyer by the name of Mr. Streisand. Do you understand what your lawyer is here to help you with? The patient says, well, yeah, he's here because the aliens are here to get me, and he's actually one of the good ones, and the aliens haven't gotten into his head, but the aliens are in everyone else's heads, and I'm pretty sure you're with the FBI, and so on. So the evaluator would probably determine if that was representative of the entire interview. That usually takes a number of hours. There's usually a number of measures, tests that people will fill out, this sort of thing, interview procedures. If that was the overall tone, then the evaluator will determine this person doesn't know what's happening and that they are incompetent right now regarding the ability to determine legal counsel, what's happening to them, and all these kinds of things. And that needs to be considered before going into court. So what the lawyer is saying, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so just understand that everything that I'm saying is from the psychology side of things, observing how the courts work. A lawyer would be able to speak to with more expertise about this. But what we're hearing is that the lawyer is saying that Britney had a assessment, and the assessment had determined that she was incompetent regarding the ability to choose even her own lawyer. Was that biased against her? I don't know. It usually isn't. It usually indicates that there was a legitimate reason for that. The reason being is that for a psychologist to make that determination in error, well, you can be sued. If you make a determination that's completely off the mark, you can have your license taken away. There's all sorts of problems that can happen to you, consequences that can happen to you, sometimes, anyway. So again, another tick in the column that just because we see Britney walking around and she seems like she's just going to the mall, there's a pretty good chance that she was suffering from some pretty severe symptoms. Who knows? But let's continue watching.
When the judge told me, Mr. Streisand, I'm not going to let you represent her, I'm going to appoint somebody, I felt that was not the right decision by the judge. I felt that based on my interactions with Britney, that she was capable of retaining me and directing me, and that the judge should have allowed that to happen.
So we'll take the lawyer's word for it that, according to him, he felt like it was not the case that Britney couldn't make that determination, that she was competent to hire me as a lawyer. But again, it's sort of self-serving. You're a lawyer and you want to help, I suppose. It's a gig that you get paid for, maybe even a little bit of notoriety. Who knows? I don't want to accuse him of anything. But it wouldn't be unusual for a lawyer in a situation like that to kind of err on the side of, no, she's competent, she hired me, when a whole number of experts would disagree. So we can't really take his opinion with a lot of assuredness that it was the accurate picture. Again, I'm pretty sure this documentary is trying to paint a picture that she was competent and that the father was a evil or negative force or not. You know, the other possibility is that there could be people out there who assessed her during that time that determined that she had a delusional idea of who the father was. That due to, and I don't even know if she suffered from delusions, but if she did, maybe some of the delusions involved the father, and people understood that the reason why she didn't want the father to be the conservator was due to her mental disorder. Who knows? But there's just a lot of speculation. And the thing that I want to tell everyone watching is that I have seen nothing in this documentary yet that really tells me anything. And I'm genuinely curious. I'm really going, what disorder did she suffer from? How severe were the symptoms? Why did she not want the father? What was the reason for that? Was it part of her disorder? Was it a no-go because of mistreatment that she went through when she was younger? There's just way too many questions and no answers presented yet. So, and I'm guessing we're not going to get it, but who knows? Let's continue watching.
Can you give us some kind of a heads up on what happened here today?
No, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be giving any statements on that.
But I didn't know what I didn't know, right? I still don't know what is in that report.
Right. So the lawyer is saying, but I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what is in that report. I don't know how they determined that she couldn't make the determination to hire me as the lawyer. If we did have access to that report, we might go, oh, I get it. Or we might be like, huh? Who knows?
Power to access her medical records and communicate with her doctors. They can take control of her house and even cancel her credit cards. They can make recording, touring, and TV deals for her and are deeply involved in her finances. There's some speculation that Britney may have basically accepted the conservatorship because she was worried about seeing her kids. And a few weeks later, she starts to get some visitation rights restored.
Right. So there's two scenarios here and many others, but one scenario is that she was only agreeing to the conservatorship because they were saying, if you want to see your kids, you have to agree to this. Even though it wasn't fair to take away her power for her own money and her own livelihood, really. There's a situation where I could see that being true. There's another situation where it was absolutely legitimate and people were like, unless someone has the ability to watch over what you're doing with your money and your home and all these other things, we do not have enough reassurance that your life will not be safe enough to actually invite your children into your life. There's an absolute possibility that that was a legitimate call that everyone was making. But again, we just don't have the data. Maybe they'll give it to us.
Got to be evidence or some demonstration that a conservatorship is not necessary at that point in time. It's the conservatee who has the burden of saying, I don't need a conservatorship anymore, and here's why.
Have you ever known anyone who has terminated a conservatorship?
Of the cases that I've been involved in, I have not seen a conservatee who has successfully terminated a conservatorship. Right.
Now, I'm wondering how audiences will take this, that they'll take what this lawyer is saying, and I didn't know that because that's not an expertise of mine, but I'm not surprised by that given the situations that I've been in, that it's once people cross that line and they are designated as a conservatee, this lawyer has never seen anyone be able to demonstrate to a court that they don't need a conservatorship anymore. Now, why would that be? I'm guessing that audience members will see this as, oh, the system's rigged against those people with conservatorships. And maybe it is. I don't know. But in my experience, it's because usually, again, because the bar is so high for someone to have their rights stripped away from them, that usually that indicates that they suffer from a pretty severe ongoing mental disorder, or at the very least, even if their symptoms come down, it's been demonstrated that they're at risk of their symptoms increasing at any time. And so keeping the conservatorship in place, even if they have a year of low symptoms or even no symptoms, is the right choice to do in some cases. I'm guessing that's why it's really hard to get rid of a conservatorship for someone. Now, if we had more data on all the conservatorships that this lawyer is referring to, particularly the Britney Spears one, maybe we would say, I think it was hastily applied to her and no one was listening to her because of all the oppressive, sexism or the way she comes across in the media, or people just don't really understand her. Who knows? But again, the documentary isn't going into it. And maybe y'all are asking, like, well, what would help me to understand? Well, I'd want to see those psychologist reports, or at least some tagline from those reports. We found that this individual was suffering from these disorders with these symptoms, and this is why we recommend a conservatorship. But until we get that, we just have no idea about any of this sort of thing. I'd also want to know what the course of the symptoms were and whether or not Britney was compliant with treatment. I'm guessing she was. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Tune in next time when we continue watching the documentary. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.